Hey guys, welcome to Drawing with Abby. In today's video, we're going to be continuing my drawing series of drawing Black Canary on my Samsung Tab S6 in Artflow. Now, in this video, we're going to be covering the inking phase. So to start off with, I'm going to be setting up my document. For my inks, I typically use the old bristle brush found under the paint brush set, not in the inking brush set. So you're gonna have to head over to your painterly brush set and find this particular brush. And the reason why I like it is because it offers a nice natural ink texture feel, but you will have to adjust some of the settings. I'll leave some of the setting numbers in the description below. But essentially you want to bump up that opacity to about 100%, change some of the angles for the pen so that you have a nice crisp line, and then work from there. So you can see here, I've started by lowering the opacity of my original sketch layer. I've been drawing on a new layer on top of it. Make sure to do that. There's been a few times where I forgot to do that correctly and found myself in quite some trouble. So just make sure that you're drawing on the correct layer before you get started. And as you can see here, this particular brush has a nice textured feeling to it, something a little bit more naturalistic versus sort of a super clean, super neat brush. And I like that gritty texture. It's something that I'm trying to incorporate more in my work. So it's something that you'll see me use more and more often. So one thing I wanted to quickly note here is how I'm drawing these large areas in my drawing. So the arms, for example, you can see here I'm intersecting or overlapping my lines for objects that are overlapping. So this arm that's going straight across, you can see there's another forearm that's supposed to be in front of it. I'm not super concerned about stopping my lines so that it matches up. I'm happy to use my eraser tool to clean it up after the fact. I'm more concerned about cleaner sweeping lines, smoother sweeping lines. So which is why you're seeing me do a lot of bold sweeping strokes, and I'm zooming in and out to make sure I'm getting the best line possible. So for example, for a larger area like the thigh, I'm going to zoom out so I can get a nice clean sweeping line with the minimal movement from my wrist. And then for smaller areas like the costuming here, I'll zoom in and I'll try to keep my lines fairly consistent. So one thing I try to avoid while I'm inking is sort of like sketchy lines, like what you kind of see here with the detailing here. I don't like the look of it, so you'll see me try to clean that up afterwards. But you'll see in things like the arms or the thighs, I try to do smooth sweeping lines, and they just have a much better professional quality look to them. One thing I want to note is the document setup is something that I kind of breezed over at the beginning of this video. Make sure when you're ready to start inking that your document setup is set to at least something of 300 DPI or 300 resolution for your document. And the reason why is because your brushes are just going to look so much better at that type of resolution versus the standard resolution, which is 72. And 72 pixels is a screen width. What you're looking for is something that's a little bit more higher resolution than that screen resolution. And that's going to help you, again, the pixels on your brush are just going to look so much better at a higher resolution document. And then if you were ever inclined to print your artwork, you're going to be better off because you'll already be working at a print resolution versus a screen resolution. You can see here that I'm continuing on that method of not being too concerned about what lines are overlapping what. I'm mostly concerned about just getting those lines in, and then I'll use the eraser tool like you see here to clean things up after the fact. Just so that I have continuity of the lines underneath, that it looks like the material underneath continues on no matter what's blocking or obstructing your view of it. It looks like it's one solid line. This is something that you can't do in traditional inks. This is only something that you can do in digital ink. So I try to take full advantage of that when I'm inking digitally. And honestly, it speeds up my process. If I had to be super careful, super deliberate about my lines, this drawing would take me a lot longer. And this video, as you can tell at the video length, it's already long enough as it is. This is me speeding the whole process up by double. So the video is about 30 minutes, I believe. The entire inking process took an hour on my Samsung Tab S6. So anything I can do, any techniques I can do to sort of speed that process up for myself, I will take full advantage of. And so if that includes using techniques that you can only use digitally, I'm gonna do it. I don't have much time to draw as much as these days as I would like to. So I'm sure you guys have very busy lifestyles as well, whether you're in school and you're studying, you're holding down a job, and drawing is something that is a hobby for you or something you want to take seriously but just don't have the time to fully embrace it. Then digital tools, digital shortcuts like this is immensely helpful in trying to squeeze in as much illustrations as you can in the shortest amount of time. So I'm going to start working on some of the details on the face. So working on those eye shapes. One thing I like to do with the irises of an eye or the pupils is not to fully define that circle or those shapes there. If anything, I'm hinting at the shape and I'm also hinting at the highlights. So you can see here, I'm not just fully completing those shapes. So that's one thing that actually took me a long time to really understand and learn about inking, is that is not just a job of outlining your figures or your pencil sketch. What you're really doing with inking is indicating and highlighting different aspects of the shape. So you don't necessarily have to complete the full outline. If anything, you just want to hint at what the shape is, hint at what the texture is, hint at what some of the lighting is at the inking stage. Indicate for the viewer how close something is to you viewing the illustration versus how further back it is. And you can do that in a variety of ways. You can add shadows, of course, but also use different thickness of lines to indicate distance from the viewer. And then you can also use the texture of your brush to indicate the material that a particular object is made out of. So something else that I do as a habit, and it may or may not work for you guys, is I don't fully outline or fully detail everything at my pencil sketch stage. This can get you in trouble if you're dealing with areas that you're not super comfortable with, like the hands, for example. I'll usually try to define the hands in my pencil sketch stage, but for details like this, like the pouch, adding in the buckles or defining the shape exactly for the pouch, I'll trust myself to figure that out at the inking stage, and I won't get super detailed about it at the sketch stage. It's really just about finding out what works with you, what you're comfortable with, and what's going to help your process. As I mentioned before, speed of my process is super important to me, especially with my current lifestyle. I'm just not able to dedicate as much time to drawing as I would like to. So anything I can do to speed up my process. So for example, not spending so much time on my sketch on working out details, just knowing that I'm going to be doing that anyway at the inking stage. So I'll leave some of that decision making to the inking stage. really at the sketch stage, I'm just indicating where objects are going to be. And then for more difficult areas, again, like the hand or the face or any particular bit of details for the hair, I will try to define that at the sketch stage, and then know that I'm going to refine those things at the inking stage. So you can see here, I've ignored some of the lines I made at the sketch stage because I'm actively thinking about what is it I'm communicating, what is it I'm illustrating for this drawing. So one of the things here is that I want to make sure I'm not covering up the face too much because I really want you to connect with those eyes on the face. So here I made the decision to change how the hairstyle works. So less bangs and more the hair is pulled apart so you can see the face more visibly. So at this point in the recording, I'm going to want to jump ahead a little bit because really I'm just outlining and filling in areas with the paint bucket tool. So I've jumped ahead to here where I'm more focused on building some textures and building out some of the look and feel of this drawing. So here you can see in the costume area of the figure, I've gone ahead, added a paint bucket drop in there, which is pure blacks. And now I'm using my inking brush set to, my eraser brush, utilizing the same old bristle brush to outline some details in the black area. So here I'm building in some highlights in this leathery, sort of this matte leather look that I'm going for this particular outfit. I'm putting in some construction lines of the material, so you indicate, where the sewing lines are, where some of the elements of the costume actually line up with each other. I find that goes a long way to add some believability behind your illustration. If you can indicate how something was constructed, like adding buttons, or if it's like a mechanical object, just adding where the nails and the rivets are, those things are very helpful. So here you can see I've opened up the materials for the brushes. So I'm looking for a different shape to use. And the reason why I'm doing this is that I want to add some texture to my drawings utilizing that eraser brush tool. So essentially I selected a different brush shape and I've applied a texture on top of the brush shape, and I'm adjusting the opacity and the spacing and the angles of that brush so I can start using that brush to indicate more texture into that leathery look of the material. So again, I'm going to be using my eraser brush, and you can see how the brush is just more scratchy. It's a little bit softer around the edges versus the old bristle brush. And I'm going to be using it and experimenting with different sizes of this particular brush to get that particular texture. So this is something that's fairly new in my drawing process. Before, I would try to rely on a single brush to do the entire illustration. But I found that to be very limiting. And you really kind of just sort of deny yourself with a lot of the tools that drawing digitally offers you. So and another thing that I've been trying to do is to zoom out a little bit more when I'm applying this type of texturing or lighting, just because you can quickly get lost into the details and sort of lose focus of what it is you're trying to accomplish if you don't zoom out every once in a while. So for example, earlier on in this drawing, you can see that my highlights didn't really make sense in context of where I wanted the lighting to be. So I had to black everything out again and then start over with this texture brush. And I'm glad I did that, because that critical thinking allowed me to improve the drawing and sort of explore new techniques as I was doing it. So just always, reassess what's going on, zoom out, take a minute, look at what's happening in your illustration, and don't be afraid to be bold and make bold decisions, like blacking things out and starting over. You're working digitally, so you have that opportunity and that luxury to do it. If anything, you can duplicate your layer into a new layer, so you can keep your original copy and then try something new, experiment with it, and see if that's the direction you want to go in without losing your process. If you're working traditionally, it'd be a lot more difficult to be that brave. So again, just another reason why I like working digitally versus traditionally on pen and paper. So now that I have this sort of softer highlight going on in the illustration, and again, I'm using that texture brush, playing around with the size and the opacity of it to build sort of those softer highlights in the leather texture. I'm going to be going back to my old bristle brush, again, using the eraser tool on top of my black inks, and I'm going to start building in some harsher highlights, some harsher crinkles in the texture, in the material, just so we can build upon the idea of this particular texture. So here, you can see I'm selecting my original brush, and then using the eraser tool, I'm going to be digging into that black area and creating some wrinkles, creating some lines, creating some harsher highlights instead of some of the softer ones that you see here. Hair can be something that's also quite tricky to do. So you're going to see I'm going to be zooming in and using that same brush, I'm going to be outlining the hair. So the thing to remember about hair is to first break it up into big shapes and then drill down into smaller shapes and then drill down into texture. So you can see here I'm down to the texture stage, but I'm still moving back and forth between building the shapes of the hair, how I want it to flow, sort of the volume of the hair, and then detailing the texture of those strands of the hair. So again, much like how we did the eyes, the job of inking at this stage isn't to outline every single grain of hair. Instead, you want to indicate overall shape of the hair and the overall texture of the hair. So You want lines that are looking like they're flowing into each other. You want shapes that are overlapping each other, so that you're building that sense of volume and that sense of movement in the hair. Especially with female characters and including male characters too, I love using hair as a way to indicate secondary movement. So secondary movement will be things like if I'm drawing Batman, for example, and he's standing on a watchtower, I can have the cape flapping to create a sense of extra movement in the illustration, even though the character is standing still. Or if it is an action pose, if it's, let's say I'm drawing Wonder Woman doing a high kick, I can use the hair to indicate how the body's twisted in space, because the hair is going to be slow to catch up to the overall movements of the body. So you can sort of indicate where the torso started off versus where it's ended up in the drawing. So here I'm using the hair just to create that sense of rough, like Canary is about to get herself into a fight. She's just warming up, so she slightly shifted her head as she's stretching her arm out. So I want the hair to sort of indicate that sort of soft movement. The hair's not flapping too wildly in the wind, but you do see a little bit of movement in the strands of the hair. So hair is a great way of adding additional movements, but what you first gotta nail down is your main shapes, breaking their main shapes down into smaller shapes, and then adding textures to those shapes. So one thing that you see me do is when it comes to applying some hatching lines to skin, I like to use a single hatch instead of a cross hatching method for skin, just because I don't want to take away from the softness that the skin texture should indicate. I also don't want to use the same sort of brush strokes or texture techniques that I'm using on other materials. So if I'm using a lot of cross hatching on the leather material, for example, I don't want to be using cross hatching on the skin, and instead I want to use a different type of hatching technique to indicate the muscle, to indicate the shapes and the form on the skin areas, but at the same time letting you as a viewer understand that you're looking at two different materials, two different textures, even though I'm trying to indicate a lot of muscle, a lot of musculature, maybe some roughness in that anatomy, but by no means do I want you to think that the skin is the exact same texture, the same level of toughness as the leather in this outfit. So you'll see that I'm very deliberate in what techniques I'm using to shape what areas of the character. So here I'm going to start using my eraser brush tool to kind of start sculpting the belt buckle in the dark areas of the drawing. The eraser tool is something that you've seen me use earlier in this drawing. In this particular case, I'm using it to define the overall shape of the object, which is slightly different from how I've been using it so far. But I find it's a great way to sort of build on my inks without having to flip back and forth between my sketches and more the opacity of my layers and all of that. Here I'm able just to quickly use the eraser tool, build out those shapes, and then use a finer inking brush to add in the details. One thing that I'm slowly starting to learn is how important contrast is when it comes to your inks. So let's say I'm going to leave this illustration completely in the black and white version without adding any colors to it. So one of the things I would have to be mindful of is making sure there's enough contrast of the dark areas versus the light areas. So in particular, this illustration, I have a character, no background. However, her outfit, I've done completely in black to indicate the black leather. Her skin areas are been left pretty much blank with the addition of some cross hashing. And we have this belt that runs across the hip that I've left completely without any additional inks on top of it. And that's purposeful. That allows you as the audience to look at this illustration and immediately read not only the pose, but the textures and some additional elements. So for example, the belt across the hip not only breaks up a little bit of how much black I'm using across the torso, as well as those buckles that runs along the middle of the costume. But it also indicates some hip movement. I'm able to indicate which hip is sitting a little higher and which hip is sitting a little lower by using my belt to be placed on an angle. So it just sort of helps sell how the character is posing, what the movement is the posing, if there's like a slight twist like we see here. All of those things come together and help. So learning contrast, learning how to use negative space, learning how to use to minimize how much ink I'm using versus the areas of lots of darkness. That's super important, and it's a strong addition to your tool set as an artist. If you guys want, I highly recommend checking out the art of Tim Sale, because he's an absolute master of contrasting dark areas and white. Another great artist to check out is Mike Manola. He utilizes it on another level. He really incorporates that not only in sort of this graphic designy layout, but he's also able to use it as part of his storytelling. So if you guys know any other artists that sort of utilize technique, please leave a comment below. I love to check out new artists, especially if I can learn new techniques like that from them. So yeah, I'd be love to hear if you guys know of any artists that kind of utilize that kind of similar technique. So I'm just gonna wrap up this video at this stage. We're pretty much finished with the entire inking of this illustration. Really, all I'm doing at this stage is just polishing up the details, refining certain elements, going back, adding some textures in certain areas of the drawing, but just reusing the same techniques that you guys have seen me use so far in the inking stage. Be sure to check out the next video in this series where I will be covering the coloring stage. And if you missed it, I also have a video where I covered sketching this illustration. If you guys like this video, go ahead, use that like button. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. I'd love to hear some feedback from you guys. Do you guys like these videos? Is there anything you guys want me to talk about that I'm not really addressing during the walkthroughs for these steps? Just leave a comment and let me know. Until next time, keep drawing.